Here are a few things to look for if you're in the market for that good used dump trailer. We have a PJ trailer here that we're going to talk about today, so come go with me. As with most trailers, if I'm looking to purchase a used trailer or doing a mechanical inspection, I'm going to start with the axles, the running gear, and the tires. And we're going to take a look at it, and especially on the dump trailer, probably the most common repair needed on a dump trailer is bent axles, usually the rear axle for sure. That's what this unit is in here for. We replaced the rear axle and then we rebuilt the front axle. The reason for the bent axles is most people will put maybe a little more weight in that dump trailer than what you're supposed to. If you own a dump trailer, have used a dump trailer, raise your hand if you have overloaded a dump trailer. I know I have. The problem with that is you will damage the axle and the suspension. So look at your suspension components, look at the axle. You can usually do that with a visual. Then take a look at the tires. This one has a nice selection of tires. We have some 14 plies. We have some ST tires on here that are different sizes. So that's going to make it run a little awkwardly going down the road. So just look at those things when buying a used one, just to make sure they didn't put whatever they had lying around on it. Because if you have to buy a set of tires, set of axles and suspension, it's going to cost you, you're going to be north of $1,000, maybe upwards of $2,000 depending on axle size and tire size on that before you can even put this unit to work. So the dump trailer, there's a lot of components that we're going to look at, but I'm always going to start with the running gear, the tires, the suspension, all those good items to see if that stuff's in good working condition. The next place we're going to take a look at is inside the toolbox, or it may not have a toolbox, but we're going to look at the hydraulic pump setup. We're going to look at the electrical system, the battery that operates it, look at all the wiring to see if we're going to need to spend any money there. This one has a blowed shock, so it will come down and smash your arm if you're not careful. So, that's going to cost you 20, 30 bucks. But take a look at the battery, see if you can find a date on it. Make sure it's not 5 or 10 years old. If you have a battery tester or a voltmeter, you could always check the battery. This one does have an onboard charger. I don't know if we can get that in the camera or not. We'll try. You can push the button on there and it will tell you that one's showing to be in fair condition, so it needs to be charged at the bare minimum. It may need to be a replacement. Likely this is the OG battery that came with this unit just from looking at it. Other thing we'll look at is the pump condition. I'm going to look for a lot of oil. I will tell you, if it's used, you're probably going to find some oil in that's usually related to it having air in the system from a low or improperly charged battery. You can check out our video about that. We'll leave a link in the description below. So don't freak out if it is covered in oil. It could have just puked all the fluid out because the battery was discharged and they lowered it down and it sucked a bunch of air in it. The main thing we look at is all the wiring. Look for the battery post, the connectors, all your wiring that goes to the battery. Make sure none of it is overheated. Make sure none of it's burnt up. Then also look at the pump. Every connection on the pump, make sure you don't have any loose wires, any insulation that's burnt off. The cables are not that expensive to replace, but if you have a bunch of cables that you have insulation burnt off, the pump could be damaged. Look at the remote, look at the hydraulic hoses, see if you have any leaks going on there. If you have to replace a hydraulic hose, you're going to, depending on the length of it, you're going to spend $150 to $400 depending on size and length. So again, it's just the little things that add up over time. So once you look in here, you're going to check the fluid level in it. Make sure it's got the correct fluid in it. If it's got some weird color in there, you may question the owner on that. Most of these pumps are either going to run a Dextron 3 transmission fluid, which will be red. If it's more of a clear or an amber or a brown color, it should be AW32 is what should be ran in that. If they've used something else, just note that system may need to be flushed and replaced with the correct fluid on there, so you're going to be out some dollars and some time. So the next thing I'm going to look at is the lifting mechanism. So lifting mechanisms can be scissor lift like this one will have. It can be a single post lift in the center. A lot of new trailers are going to that. I'm a fan of that, as well as the scissor. Then there's some units out there that will have a 2-cylinder, so one on each side of the frame attached. I'm not a fan of those. If you're looking to buy one of those used, those are usually cheaper, new and used compared to other models. Check the connections where those mount to the frame. A lot of the time, just because of the way those are designed and set up, you will have some frame cracking, which is a whole other can of worms to open up. So we're going to raise this one up. We're going to take a look at the lift mechanism on this one. So we have the trailer properly supported. The support arms I have in here, it's not going to come with that. It's going to come with a very short arm. So if you don't have something taller, you're going to put it on the support that comes from the manufacturer. You may have to get underneath it with a creeper or something like that. We build these, and I recommend having a set of these if you own a dump trailer, just to make it a little easier to work on. Now, if you have a center mount exterior lift, like a big truck would have, you're not going to have to crawl up underneath it, but you still need to inspect underneath it as far as any frame cracking, support damage, and your hinge grease points. So we're going to look at the scissor lift mechanism, and what I'm looking for is to see if it has any grease. If it doesn't have a bunch of grease coming out, it likely hasn't been greased. This has a minimal amount of grease, so that tells me that there's a chance it's not been properly maintained, and I may have some binding with the pin on it. You have the upper pin as well. I don't know if we can see that. There's some grease there. That looks like it's had a little more grease, but you also want to look at that beam to see if it looks bent. The rod does not go all the way across. It just goes part of the way in there as far as the way it swivels. So if it's got some bending in there, note that, because that could cause a binding issue. And we occasionally see these that will fracture completely out of the frame. So look at any place where this is welded, bolted, or attached to make sure you don't have any cracking, tearing, bending, anything that just looks off. If it looks off, likely it is off. Look also at the substructure underneath. Like I said earlier, if you have one of the trailers that has a twin cylinder lift, there's a good chance you're going to have some frame cracking, or it's going to be repaired. So look at all your substructure, any cross member you have. This, with a dump trailer, this also gives you an extra opportunity to look at the suspension and the axles, your wiring, ramp holders, just anything that's welded that could have come loose, that could have been overworked and abused, that may need some maintenance or may need replacement on there. I will tell you, don't be scared if the dump trailer cosmetically looks rough. If it's a dump trailer, it should be used. And if it's not rough, then it just hasn't been used. But don't let the cosmetics freak you out. You'll see inside the bed here in a minute. I really could care less about the paint quality and the cosmetics on a dump trailer. After all, they're made to be used. But just make sure that everything is in good working order. Anything that pivots, swivels, any frame locations as far as like your cross members that are crucial for structure, just keep an eyeball on those. This could go if you're going to go borrow somebody's trailer, or if you're going to rent one. I would look at that before I go out and use one. Even if you're renting one and it has some type of insurance or warranty on it, you don't want to break down. If you're on a job site, that's going to cost you time and money. So we've looked at this. The only thing I would say this needs is some grease. You know, occasionally you may be missing a grease zert, or you may have to replace one. Like I said, we will leave a link in the description below that covers proper maintenance of your lift mechanism, how to grease it, and to cover that along with other grease points on the dump trailer. So we're going to let this back down, and then we're going to look inside the bed and look at a couple of other areas just to look for, and hopefully this will answer any questions you may have. And just remember something else that's very critical, and when looking at a used trailer, whether it be dump or anything else, make sure it's got the proper paperwork. Depending on which state you live in, make sure you've got the correct title work, MSO, whatever you need to go get that registered in your name. Another place to look is to check the functionality of the doors. Many times the doors will get torn up, whether that's a multi-function style door and gate setup or just your basic butterflies. Just open them up, make sure they work, make sure they open all the way, make sure they close. This one just had 2 new doors put on it because they got ripped off. That happens a lot in the dump trailer world. You won't get the door secured and you can't see it when you go to raise it. These are in the rear position and it will peel them off like a sardine can. So note that. Just take a look. While you're looking, look inside the bed. You can see here some waviness in the floor. You can see all the coating is rubbed off. Again, that doesn't scare me whatsoever. The waviness in the floor tells me a couple things. They've used it's a haul sand or some type of fine aggregate that's just kind of grinding it all off. As it's dumped, you can have this recoated so it doesn't rust through, but most of your quality dump trailers are going to have a pretty thick bed or a pan in them, usually a little thicker than what you have on the sidewall. The waviness could be from hauling rocks. It could be from overloaded, and likely there's a good chance it has been overloaded at some point in its life. So that being said, if you decide to purchase one, what you need to do to figure out how much you can haul in it is measure the cubic foot of this. So you can go online, find you a cubic foot calculator, tell you how to measure it. That way you can figure out when you go to buy material, how deep you can put it. You cannot fill this full of sand. It will be grossly overloaded. When you figure out your cubic foot as far as weight distributed, you know, I would recommend you put some paint marks in there, just something to mark it to say, hey, know, this is about where I should be. Now, if you pile it up in the middle and you don't have it all the way to each corner, you're gonna have to, you know, that's something you're just gonna have to account for when you do that. But don't necessarily let the inside, even if you have some warping on the side panels, as long as the doors and stuff shut, it doesn't look like the sides are gonna fall off. I mean, a dump trailer is going to be used, so don't let that scare you off. You just may need to do a little maintenance on it. Check all your seams. If it's a three-way gate like this one, this does have a spreader gate on it. Just make sure that functions. You can open it up, raise it up to see if it swings back and forth. Not a ton of money for any of these parts really, but again, if you're buying it used, all these little things could add up. If you're planning on hauling a tractor or a skid steer or mini track loader, if it has ramps and has the capability to do that, double check the ramps, make sure the ramps are in place, pull them out, make sure they function, make sure you got good baling wire to hold them on if that's what you're using for a ramp holder. But just check that out, because if the ramps are missing or if they're worn out, again, that's going to be, you know, $400 or $500 for a good set of ramps to fit in here. And many times on these, you have to buy the ramp specific to the unit in order for them to stay in the underbelly storage location. Not every ramp will interchange, so check those out. This component here is not the most costly on here. Sometimes you can just replace a part of it. Sometimes you have to replace the whole mechanism. Like, again, it's not a ton of money, but in most states you are required to have this if hauling any type of loose material, and that is the tarp mechanism. So the fabric on this one definitely needs to be replaced. They make them in solid tarp, they make them in mesh like this one. The mesh is pretty inexpensive. It will last a while out in the heat and the weather, but at some point you're going to have to replace it. And many times you can just replace this unless you've damaged the roller mechanism. Then you may have to put a complete unit on there as well. So just note that if you find one that just needs the mesh, as long as everything else works correctly, you can buy just this. Don't let somebody try to sell you the whole mechanism if you don't need it. Within the mechanism, we'll move out here to the end real quick. These block style bearings, make sure they look like they've had some grease. Sometimes if they're not greased, you'll have some cracking here. Again, you can buy just that block to put on there. Then on the other side is the roller handle. You can buy all these components in a kit. You can buy them separately. So again, just make sure all those are there, because if they're not, you're going to have to buy a handle, you're going to have to fab a handle, you're going to have to do something. So just check out the tarp on the unit. I would recommend, if the seller allows you to pull it out, I would pull it out and check it to see if it has a big, it may look good right here. You may have one that looks brand new. You may get rolled out and it may have a huge hole in the middle of it where they had it over some scrap metal or some brush or something like that. So pull it out to make sure you've got what you need to get to work on that. And then the obvious things like we talked about in our other used trailer video, look at the wiring and the lights, stuff like that. That's not going to be the biggest thing for me on the dump trailer. The two biggest things are going to be the running gear and the lift apparatus, whether that be the pump and or the lift mechanism, whether that's scissor, twin post, or single post. Then again, look at your jack, your safety chains, your breakaway components, the coupler. Just, I mean, really just take a flashlight. Don't let that good deal get you sucked in. You know, it's not, you know, we're not buying this at midnight and just because it's a closeout, the best deal. Take some time to look it over, work with the seller. You make and negotiate that. You know, if they don't want to negotiate, that's just a decision you're going to have to make at that time. But these practices, again, are very good if you're going to borrow your buddy's trailer, because they may not do proper maintenance, or you may be renting from some rental company that maybe hasn't had the best practices as maintenance. You know as well as I do, the old saying, drive it like a rental. There's a lot of truth in that. I would be scared to rent a dump trailer to the public for what I see gets put in them a lot of the time, because again, they just get overloaded. So if you're looking at purchasing a used dump, or if you have your own dump, these are some good practices you can look at. Check out the videos in the link below in the description that talks about some proper maintenance, some other things to look for, and just make sure you do your homework before you hand out the cash, because once you own it, and it may cost you the big bucks to get it going to put to work.